Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drehon, and welcome back to Dungeons & Dragons Character Concept Optimized, where we take a look at two classes and see what we can do to mesh them together and make the min-maxiest build from those two classes with the help of race and background options to try to see how powerful we can get that concept to be. And today's a weird one. I have most likely told a couple of you viewers that it is not a good idea to try to mesh two classes together with clashing abilities. And this is one of those build types, the Barbarian and Monk. No, seriously, there are a lot of things wrong with this build idea, and I'm sure a lot of you already know this. For one, the unarmored defense of both of these classes use different abilities. For the Barbarian, it is your Dexterity and Constitution. For the Monk, it is your Dexterity and Wisdom. Furthermore, the Barbarian and Monk use two different ability scores for their attack modifiers. For the Barbarian, they are focused on a strength-based build because of their rage. And for the Monk, they are either a Dexterity or Wisdom-based build, depending on what monastic tradition they follow. And it just clashes. So why am I talking about this build today? Well, I was actually inspired by a couple of different other YouTubers on doing this very build, because there are surprisingly some good abilities that mesh well together for an optimized build. So let's go ahead and dive right into the goals of this build. As always, we need to figure out what race we're using, what background will be perfect for this build, and for our Barbarian, we need to know how many levels we're using and what subclass is going to be used. What is the primal path of our Barbarian half of the build? Same goes for the Monk. How many levels of Monk are we using? And what monastic tradition will our Monk follow? And lastly, we will take a look at what feats might help improve on the build. See if we can push the limits on how maximum exactly a min-max build can get. Other goals that we are going to need to consider are having a good armor class or being able to reduce as much damage as possible. We're actually going to have two different builds this video that are focused on two different aspects. One of them is going to be this damage reduction, while the other is going to not hold any punches. In fact, it's going to have you catch these hands, as it were. You could say this is a build of the Furious Fist variety. We'll most likely be mimicking that one scene from JoJo's Bizarre Adventures where they're throwing so many hands while giving out a very weird battle cry. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and get straight into things with the race, which I'm sure you already know where this is going. This is a race that only works with this build. It's going to give us exactly what we need and skip out on everything that we don't. I am, of course, talking about the turtle. What, you think I was going to do another race? No, we're doing the turtle, and that is because of its claws ability. This makes our unarmed strikes deal 1d6 plus our strength modifier in damage. We also get a natural armor of 17, automatically getting a nature's intuition. We'll go with perception, But yeah, that unarmed strike is what we are going for, giving us a solid start on damage output. Not to mention, shell defense increases our armor class if we decide to go the route of protection, which honestly is pretty good. But let's go ahead and move on to the second race option, and that is going to be the Kalishtar. This is because they have resistance to psychic damage. So if somebody is going to deal psychic damage to us, it's going to be halved. But we also have access to dual mind and mental discipline, which mental discipline is where we're getting our psychic damage from, but that dual mind ability gives us advantage on our wisdom saving throws, which is something we would not get if we start out as a barbarian, which for both of these builds, we are most definitely starting as a barbarian. Mostly for that high starting hit point value, which is going to be 12 plus your constitution modifier, which if you do this right, you should have at least a 15. Next is our background, which we have two different backgrounds to go off of here. We have Giant Foundling as our first one, and we are getting our skill proficiencies in Intimidation and Survival, and languages is Giant and one of choice. And we get a feat in Strike of the Giants, which we're going to pick the Fire Strike ability, which is going to give us an extra 1d10 fire damage to our very first melee weapon attack or ranged weapon attack using a thrown weapon, which is definitely one of the better options. All the options are good, but for the purposes of this build, we want that Fire Strike, and I'll explain more once we get into the feats. So going off of our damage calculations from earlier, our first weapon attack is going to be questionable amount of damage, plus our strength modifier, plus our 1d10. We'll go ahead and calculate more once we get into our Barbarian class. Our second background is going to be the Rune Carver. This is going to be for our Kalishtar build. This will give us access to history and perception for our skills, one set of artisan's tool of our choice, and the language of giants. And we get the feat of Rune Shaper, and we are going to pick the Frost Rune. This is going to give us access to the spell Armor of Agathis, which is going to give us 5 temporary hit points. And if a creature were to attack us with a melee attack, they will take 5 points of cold damage, which is pretty neat, but we're mostly going for that temporary hit points. This will help us with keeping ourselves alive. Now for our class, we're going to start things off with the Barbarian, like I said, but we're only going 3 levels into Barbarian to get access to Primal Path, Path of the Beast. This is because of Form of the Beast, giving us access to 2 claw attacks. Well, technically it's being able to transform our hands into a natural weapon, which is a melee weapon, not an unarmed strike, mind you. It is just a natural weapon that counts as a melee weapon, which deals 1d6 slashing damage on a hit, and it uses our strength modifier for our attack and damage rolls. So we have our 1d6 plus our strength modifier, plus our rage bonus, which is only a +2, but since this is a weapon attack, that Strike of the Giants feature is going to give us that extra 1d10 fire damage. And since we are using the claw attack, once on each of our turns, when we attack with a claw using the attack action, we can make an additional claw attack as part of the same action. effectively giving us 1 additional attack. And if we were to calculate at least 1 monk level, we'd be able to attack with our unarmed strikes, giving us 1d6 plus strength plus rage. Alright, moving on to our second primal path, which is the path of the Totem Warrior. Bet you didn't see that coming. We picked Kalashtar as our race, so why wouldn't we pick the Totem Warrior? More specifically, we are going with the Totem Spirit of the Bear, giving us access to resistance to all damage types, except Psychic, but since we're a Kalashtar, we automatically get that resistance to Psychic damage. Next is our Eagle Aspect, which is going to give us a viewing distance of 100 feet. Unfortunately, if we're in the dark, we are not going to be so lucky with this distance, but that's when our monk's going to come in. Additionally, dim light doesn't oppose disadvantage on your wisdom perception checks, which is pretty good. And like I said, now that we have this bear totem along with our Kalashtar, we now have resistance to all damage types. Moving on to our monk. For our first build, we are going 17 levels into our monk, and we're picking the monastic tradition of Way of the Drunken Master. This is an excellent subclass, and let me tell you why. As a Way of the Drunken Master monk, we get bonus proficiencies in the performance skill and the brewer's surprise tool. We also get drunken technique, tipsy sway, and drunkard's luck, as well as intoxicated fury. Thanks to intoxicated fury, we are able to get 3 additional unarmed strikes when we use a key point for Flurry of Blows, for a grand total of 5 unarmed strikes as our bonus action. And we have access to extra attack along with the Beast Barbarian's claw attacks while we are raging. This means that if we have a Yokla, which we can use as a monk weapon thanks to our part of our dedicated weapon, making it a monk weapon, we can use the martial arts feature to replace the damage die of the Ulqua with our martial arts die, which currently is a D10. Which is great. I love it. Moving on to our second monk tradition is going to be the Way of the Astral Self. This will give us access to Arms of the Astral Self, Visage of the Astral Self, and Body of the Astral Self, which is great because as a monk we get access to deflect missiles and evasion. And thanks to Astral Self, we also get access to deflect energy, which means when we take acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, or thunder damage, you can use your reaction to deflect it. When you do so, the damage you take is reduced by 1d10 plus your wisdom modifier, minimum reduction of 1. Let's go ahead and crunch some numbers here real quick. Let's say you're battling Tiamat once you reach level 20, which I'm sure by that time you should be facing off against Tiamat. If you are playing this version of the build, the Kalashtar Totem Warrior Barbarian with the Way of the Astral Self Monk, if Tiamat uses her Fire Breath, which is her most damaging breath, at 91 fire damage, you as this Way of the Astral Self Totem Warrior Barbarian Monk are able to use your evasion if you fail to still cut that damage in half. You are resistant to that damage that you just cut in half. So that means you get to cut that damage in half again. Then you will use your reaction to deflect the energy from this fire breath, decreasing it by 1d10 plus your wisdom modifier. So, taking the average of this fire breath and the average that you will roll from your deflect energy, you will only be taking 13 points of fire damage if you fail the saving throw. If you succeed, you take nothing, because that's how your evasion works. But if you fail, you're still only taking 13 points of fire damage, which I've got to say is kind of embarrassing for a breath weapon from Tiamat. Now let's go ahead and move on to our feats. The feats that I think will work well for both of these builds is going to be, first off, your Ember of the Fire Giant, which is going to give you the ability to switch out one of your attacks during your attack action with the ability Searing Ignition, which produces a flame in a 15-foot radius centered on you, which deals to each creature in that area 1d8 plus your proficiency bonus in fire damage. Since you're still using your attack action, you will then be using your first claw attack to deal 1d6 plus your strength modifier plus your rage bonus plus 1d10 fire damage. Your second claw attack comes next, since you just use a claw attack in your attack action. Another 1d6 plus your strength modifier plus your rage bonus. Then you will be spending 1 key point for your bonus action and deal 1d10 plus your strength modifier plus your rage bonus 5 times, thanks to your unarmed strikes. And next, if we have the Sentinel feat with Martial Adept bringing up Brace en Riposte, we have the ability to use our maneuvers that we get from Martial Adept with our Yorkwa weapon to deal 1d10 plus our strength modifier plus our rage bonus, and since it is no longer our turn, but our opponent's turn, we get to deal that 1d10 fire damage again, plus the martial arts die, which is currently a 1d6. Well, it's only going to be a 1d6 since it's part of the martial adept feat. But this would not count if we are just doing a normal opportunity attack, like with Sentinel. I'd also recommend using the tough feats only if you wanted to increase your HP maximum. But look at this. That right there is 9 attacks. If we were using any unearthed arcana, I would have instead picked the fighting initiate to grab the fighting style of the tunnel fighter. But because of my own rules, I cannot put that in this build. But just to let you know that that was on my mind. With this setup here, we have 9 attacks, because our opportunity attack takes our reaction. So, let's go ahead and get into the final calculations for our first build with our total. With an AC of 17, our background is the Giant Foundling using Fire Strike. We're going 3 levels into Barbarian which will give us access to Rage, Danger Sense, Reckless Attack, and our Primal Path, which is going to be Path of the Beast, which gives access to Form of the Beast. We are also getting access to 17 levels of Monk. We get access to our martial arts, our key, which uses our wisdom modifier. We get access to the dedicated weapon. We get access to the monastic tradition, Way of the Drunken Master. Get access to deflect missiles and key fueled attack. With Way of the Drunken Master, we get access to bonus proficiencies, Drunken Technique, Tipsy Sway, Drunkard's Luck, and Intoxicated Fury. This build has so many attacks, it is not even funny. And thanks to the feats of Ember of the Fire Giant, Martial Adept using Brace and Riposte, and Sentinel, we have a build that is able to deal 9 attacks. It is phenomenal. 1 round, 9 attacks. Going on to... Oh yeah, I forgot. Since we are level 17 Monk, we still have the Slow Fall, Quickened Healing, Extra Attack, Stunning Strike, Focused Aim, Key Empowered Strikes, Evasion, Stillness of Mind, Purity of Body, Tongue of Sung and Soul, Diamond Soul, and Timeless Body. Now, I will admit, a backstory for this character is a bit iffy. Yes, these subclasses, along with the background, do have a way of explaining a backstory for this character. But I don't know how to mesh that well together. The best thing I can do for a backstory is to say that this Barbarian is basically the Tortonator from Pokemon. A turtle with a with the ability to use fire attacks, which is hilarious, but that is the only thing I can come up with. You're basically themed around Tortonator. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to our second build, which I have provided starting stats for you, just so we could have a somewhat viable build. Strength of 13, Dexterity of 14, Constitution of 12, Intelligence is 10, 14 on your Wisdom, and Charisma is also a 10. This way we still have our Strength minimum to multi-class from Barbarian into Monk, but also have our Dexterity and Wisdom minimums to go into Monk. We got this? Awesome. We are going with 8 levels into Barbarian using the Primal Path of the Totem Warrior, giving us access to the Spirit Seeker, Totem Spirit of the Bear, Aspect of the Beast Eagle, and for our Monk we are going with the Monastic Tradition of Way of Astral Self, giving us access to the Arms of Astral Self, Visage of Astral Self, which gives us access to Aura Sight of 120 feet. We have Wisdom of the Spirit and Word of the Spirit, which Word of the Spirit is pretty funny, but it's not important for this build. We also have Body of the Astral Self, which gives us access to Deflect Energy and Empowered Arms. And we also have access to Deflect Missiles, as well as Key Fueled Attack, Slow Fall, Quickened Healing, Extra Attack, Stunning Strike, Focused Aim, Empower, Key Empowered Strikes, Evasion, Stillness of Mind, and Purity of Body. Both of these builds are pretty good, but with this build in particular, I was actually able to get a somewhat more realistic backstory that sort of made sense. Ever heard of Touching Spirit Bear? Yeah, well, replace Spirit Bear with Owl Bear. I mean, even in the Player's Handbook and the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, it encourages you to sort of play off of different types of animals that you could be having a totem of. Even in Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, the Uthgardt totems have stuff like the Sky Pony, basically a Pegasus. So you would pick the Eagle and the Elk, which is pretty cool. Or the Thunder Beast, Bear with the Tiger totem. All pretty viable ways of making this character seem more realistic. But yeah, that are those builds. What did you think? Which bonk would you use? Would you like to attack as often as possible, or would you like to stay alive for as long as possible? Let me know in the comments section below. And what type of min-max build would you like me to do in the future? With that being said, this has been Drehon, and I am offline.